And we're live. Welcome to Music Matters with Jason Tramm, and thank you for joining us for our unique podcast community, where we explore the triumphs and challenges of the performing arts world as seen through the eyes of distinguished artists. And thank you so much for helping our community grow. We hit 1,810 subscribers this week, and we keep growing every day thanks to people like you. Please remember to subscribe and smash that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on our upcoming guests and topics. We love it when we have the audience join in the chat, so join in the conversation, ask questions of our guests. It makes the conversation more interesting. To see our over 260 past episodes, check out our website at www.jasontramm.net. Again, that's www.jasontramm.net. Today's guest is fantastic. We have Will Carpenter, who is the founder, vocalist, and guitar player for Ships Have Sailed, an indie pop band which is making some really great music since 2013. Deeply introspective and thoughtful lyrics, and a sound that is sincerely indie rock and unabashed pop in structure. And I can't wait to talk to him. Will, welcome to Music Matters.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Jason. Nice to meet you.
You told me you were based in LA. How are things in the West Coast today?
Things actually, were really hot. Today actually felt like summer, which is a little bit weird given that it's just beginning to be April, but, I guess I won't complain. There are worse things like snow and ice.
Are you originally a Californian?
No, I actually grew up in New England, and I've spent a decent amount of time in, your home city, New York, as well. So I am originally an East Coaster and very much used to the seasons and all of their quirks, but now I'm spoiled by the SoCal weather.
72 and sunny seems to be the modus operandi for all my friends out west, and you can't beat that.
Yeah, for sure.
So did you always know you wanted to be an artist?
I would say that I discovered the musical genes in my body, heart, and soul at a very early age. The story goes that my mom, who mostly listened to classical and folk back in the day, had gone to make some food or something in the other room, and she'd left a Vivaldi concerto on the record player, playing, and I was just sitting there as must have been 2 or 3 years old, playing with my blocks. She came back into the room, and apparently I was humming along. She says flawlessly. I don't know how true that is. But yeah, from there, I took some classical violin lessons, some classical piano lessons. I very much liked to learn by ear, which, as I'm sure you know, is not really what is desirable for a classically trained musician. So my instructors didn't love that, and I kind of drifted towards more popular forms of music that kind of allow for that type of a learning process.
So the guitar was the next chapter for you?
Actually, bass came before guitar. I was a really big Nirvana fan, and I was a really big fan of their bassist, Chris Novoselic, and I thought he was really creative about the bass lines he came up with. So, and also it was easier to join a band as a bass player than as a guitar player.
They always need bass players. Isn't that the truth?
Yep, totally. So bass came first, guitar came after. But funny enough, I taught myself to play the bass using an acoustic guitar. I just kind of
only use the last 4 strings. I gotcha.
Exactly.
Wow. So, were you joining bands at a young age? What was it like? And were you writing songs from the beginning?
Yes, very bad ones. You
gotta crawl before you can walk.
That's exactly right. So you got to start somewhere. And I joined, I think, my first band at about the age of 11 or so, and I started making really, really noisy music. It's a long story, but that whole shift ultimately got me kicked out of my house, and I went down a little bit of a difficult path for a while. But I also played in cover bands. There was a funk and a ska band at some point, 2 different projects. I kind of dipped my toe in a lot of different musical pools growing up.
That's really important to kind of get that background with the different genres and styles, and that's how you find your own, I guess.
100%. And then also in today's popular music landscape, there is so much genre bending going on that it really is a benefit to kind of have all of those tools in your toolbox, because you can readily use them. I mean, it sounds like you've been spending some time with our catalog, and so you can appreciate how diverse it is sonically, which is a little bit of a challenge because you have to also remain cohesive, of course, and especially when releasing something like an album. But I hope, fingers crossed, we do that quite effectively.
Well, you certainly do from everything I've heard. Now, I always ask artists, I'm fascinated by this. Why produce albums in 2022? It's such a singles market, but I love to hear why artists are still creating albums, and like I think it's wonderful.
Well, so it's an interesting question. For me, I think it probably is an answer that varies depending on which artist you're going to ask. But for me, it's a really personal one. I just really love albums. Throughout history, I have been kind of obsessed with a really well put together album, like, Dark Side of the Moon or The Wall by Pink Floyd.
Doesn't get any better than that one, huh?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of like progressive rock and metal bands that do concept albums, and some of those are really well executed, and even ones that aren't particularly concepty, as like they don't come across as contrived, but they tell a cohesive story. Like, I think Nirvana's Nevermind is a really good example of that, and Purple by Stone Temple Pilots. So I just really, really like the album format myself as a human being. And so when I think that there is a story to be told that can be told over the course of 10 or 11 or 12 songs, I kind of feel like I owe it to the folks who appreciate what we do and have been on the journey with us this long to give them kind of a bigger body of work. Although I do so sparingly, and because it is a single driven world. And what you might have noticed in our latest album, Ages, is that many of those songs were previously released as singles in the couple of years leading up to the album. And that's kind of how you can skirt around the single driven marketplace and yet put together a body of work that, there were only 4 songs that were unreleased on our album Ages. And, we had people still eagerly awaiting the release and then following up with us afterwards, telling us how differently they look at some of these songs, even if they've heard them before, just hearing them in the context of the album. And I think that's kind of the idea there, is to like give a different perspective even to something familiar just by where it happens in the sequence or the story.
Did you have the album planned before you put the singles out, or was that in process as they were finished? Or how do you kind of plan that release schedule?
That is a really good question. A bunch of the singles were actually released before the album was even an idea. And, if I go back to the moment when I may have had an inkling that something bigger was brewing, it would have been the experience that wound up writing our song Escape. And that came out weird. I'll explain. Basically, it was a little bit of an out-of-body experience, actually. This song, it just kind of like wove itself out of thin air. And my wife and I had just experienced a really personal, traumatic event, which is that her mom had just, we had just gotten back from an emergency trip to New Jersey because her mom had been admitted to the hospital and nobody knew what was wrong with her. So we went to New Jersey and we spent a bunch of time at the hospital, and we talked to a whole bunch of, medical staff and people trying to figure out what was wrong. Long story short, her cancer, which had been in remission for quite some time, had reemerged in a very unusual way that was causing some symptoms that were at the beginning inexplicable. So it was kind of like we were in a House MD episode for about a week. And once we had her mom stabilized and the situation kind of figured out, and of course, the beginning of a cancer treatment is still a long road, but at least we weren't concerned about, like, you know, her immediate well-being. So we turned around, we came back to LA, and we had left in a hurry. There were no groceries in our house. This was pre-COVID. And so we decided, it was like late when we got back, and we decided to just go to this little neighborhood Italian place in our that was a favorite of ours. And songs come to me at the worst times, like the worst but the best. And in this case, we were just sitting down, we had just ordered a glass of wine, and we were getting ready to just take a deep breath and be like, okay, like, let's kind of like sort through that, and like, what are our next steps? And Escape jumped into my head, and it was almost like I was listening back to the finished product exactly how I wanted to hear it, just in my brain. It was unlike anything I've ever experienced as a songwriter. And so I excused myself. My wife is very understanding when these things happen. She would
have to be, wouldn't she?
Yeah, she's experienced some interesting song idea births. So I stepped outside, and I was just like typing as fast as my thumbs would do, and like taking voice memos for melodies, and like even kind of like beatboxing like the drum groove, which was like completely all there. It's like this plodding kind of marchy thing that's very unusual, and it switches from 4 to 6 like in this kind of weird meandering way. But it was all right there, and it took me about 5 minutes, and I was like, okay, so last chorus, end of the song. And I kind of looked up, like, because I was, you know, very focused, and I didn't notice anything around me, so I picked my head up, and it was raining on me. And that song has an outro verse. Like, I hadn't written the outro verse, and as soon as I like noticed that the rain was hitting me, it like wrote itself. And so that's kind of when I got an inkling that there was maybe something more. But even in releasing that single, there was no plan for the album. I feel like the album plan maybe happened just like in well, actually, it was shortly after we released that single in 2019, probably over the summer. We were kind of like trying to map out the story, figure out where all of these building blocks fit in, and write about, you know, 60% of it.
You never know when that muse strikes. Isn't that amazing? Some songs must take like forever to write, and then some of them just come to you in that kind of mysterious way. But the muse is a mysterious thing, and I'm fascinated by the creative process. And you know, isn't it amazing how like sometimes the most intense emotions, that's what brings out things that that are going to touch people's lives all over the world.
Yeah, 100%. And it's very interesting. I have to say that was about the quickest the song has ever written itself for me. And sometimes it can take, you know, it can take years to find the right line. Like maybe the whole song is there and you just don't have the right line, and you just have to be patient. But yeah, that is one of the things that I truly love about music, is how it can kind of connect us all, no matter how different our lifestyles or our backgrounds or our geographic location or our culture. Like, if you can connect to the emotion behind a song, I almost don't care what language it's in. You know what I mean? Like, the music can really, really do the speaking and create that bond from across crazy distances. It's really amazing.
I was looking at your Spotify. You're getting about 40,000 listens a month, so you're hitting people all over the world. What's it like to see your music go out there and come back at you in such an interesting and global way?
It is it is next level. I have to say I'm really, really grateful for, all of the momentum that we've been lucky enough to build, especially over the past year. But even starting, from nothing, we have this one fan who I shouldn't call her a fan. She's a friend at this point. And she's over in the UK. And she was one of the first people who ever found our music right when we released our first single. And she still is a supporter to this day. She has watched us go from kind of clumsy songwriters, and I'll speak for myself, a very clumsy producer, to what you can hear now on our album Ages. And it's been a journey, and every step in that journey is a worthy one, I think.
So tell us about the name Ships of Sail. Where'd that come from, and what defines your music to you?
Wow, that second half is going to be a long and rambling answer. The first half, I actually have, I have the story pretty well buttoned up for that.
That's why I love podcasts, because it's so, the podcast format gives you such a chance to talk about what makes your music vibrant. I watch 5-minute interviews, you can never get as deep, and I love hearing people like yourself talk about music.
Yeah. Well, thank you for digging in, and I mean, you've done an incredible amount of research, so I really appreciate your preparation. The name Ships Have Sailed. So when the first EP's worth of songs was forming, I was in another band. We were signed to a small but very reputable label, and it was a 6-piece project that was very genre specific. It was like a rock hip hop fusion, but think like Foster the People meets early Kanye West, as opposed to like a Linkin Park.
I just love the synchronicity across genres. I just think that's so cool.
I mean, it was a great project with a lot of potential, but there were 6 members, and what happened is, it's an age-old thing where when success starts happening, maybe you don't have all of your logistics ironed out and agreed to in writing, and some people want to go one way and others want to go another. So really, all I need to say about that is that the band was kind of like in a tough spot, and half the members wanted to do one thing, half the members wanted to do another thing, and it really felt like we were hitting a wall with the conversation. So in the meantime, these songs were never going to be a fit for that genre or that genre blend. And so I started just producing demos in my home studio, just enough to get presentable enough to show them to a couple of my friends. And friend comes over, he's like, cool, what are you going to call it? And I'm like, okay, now I need to find a band name. And over the course of demoing these out and, getting some feedback, that other project was in fact circling the drain, and I'd put a lot of time and energy into it. We'd seen a lot of success, and there would have been more but for the logistics. So I'll just say that I was throwing myself a late night pity party. There were probably several glasses of wine involved, and it was 2 a.m, and I realized that I was just I was being cyclical. I'm a little OCD and I get stuck in my head, and I'm just okay, if you keep thinking about it like this, you're going to drive yourself nuts. You need to back off, and maybe there is a reason. Maybe there's a reason why you're hitting a wall over here. Maybe this is an opportunity to go and really focus on this other music that's just starting, and it's new and it's yours, and you can do whatever the hell you want with it. So I took a deep breath.
It's very freeing.
Yeah, I took a deep breath, and the phrase "that ship has sailed" popped into my head, which refers to missed opportunities. And I was just it's not right. It's a little bit negative. It's too negative. It should be a little bit more agnostic. Ships have sailed. like, you know, all of these journeys that we potentially could go in our lifetime that could take us any number of places, and yet here we are. We're here for a reason, right? So I realized that that actually was a really cool band name, and I went online to search for it, expecting that it had probably been used several times, and I found that it hadn't been. So so I grabbed the domain name shipsofsail.com, which is where you can find our mailing list and all of our socials and our new album, most importantly. And the rest is history. And honestly, I will say that, you know, I've had an interesting journey in this life. I did not have the most fortunate entry into this world. My family, like, I come from a broken home. I have been homeless. I, you know, put myself through college after making some really tough decisions that could have wound me up in darker places than here. And yet somehow I'm here. So when you have those kinds of experiences, I think a lot of us default to a lot of folks who have struggled in their lives can have a tendency to default towards the negative. And so what I've been trying to do is to kind of allow the mantra of Ships Have Sailed to permeate itself into my life philosophy, and not just the music, but like try to kind of break myself out of those old defaults that are to see a struggle or an obstacle as a negative thing, and perhaps look at it as, what can I learn from this?
That's a healthy philosophy.
Why am I experiencing it? Yeah, and it's not perfect, and nor am I, but it's a work in progress. And I think that, like, you asked me, like, I forget the way you phrased it, but essentially, like, what is my interpretation of this project? And that really is it. It is finding the silver lining in the darkest cloud, and making sure that even in difficult moments, that you can always find some hope and a way forward. And for me, music has always been that. So it is very fitting that this has now become a musical philosophy.
And it's been since 2013 the band started. This particular band has started, is that correct?
Yeah, we released our first single, Midnight, in, I want to say it was August 2013. So yeah, actually closing in on, that would be 10 years next year, huh? Wow.
It's exciting. And have you locked in the lineup? Do you is the lineup changeable based on the albums? How does that work in your bands, in this specific band?
So interestingly enough, the lineup has been locked. Well, at least I've been playing with my good friend and drummer Art since 2015. We did have a bass player, my friend Dan, and his life just kind of got a little bit too full of life-related stuff for him to be able to, you know, make time to be out on the road with us. So we adjusted and we started touring as a duo instead. People are pretty accepting when you have backing tracks on stage these days. So we dialed in our backing tracks, and Art and I kind of did our thing as a duo. We were actually out on tour when the pandemic escalated. 2020 was supposed to be a live year for us. We were out on one run of what was going to be about 4 or 5 that year. Wow. And it was a really weird thing watching things go sideways from the road. But we had to pivot, and we released some music, and this album was already kind of like conceived and in the works. So we leaned into that and leaned into a whole bunch of other opportunities that have presented themselves as the result of the pandemic. You know, because entire industries shut down, the tastemakers have extra time on their hands, and you might be able to hop into a Zoom with a couple of them. Face-to-face meetings like that with like industry gatekeepers really don't happen in a normal world unless you're very, very well connected. And so I guess it's just a matter of, taking advantage of whatever benefit you can, even from a really, really scary situation. But in answer to your original question, so the lineup is me and my drummer Art at the moment. Potentially, I would love to have a full band on stage, but I also believe in paying my fellow artists what they're worth. And so at the moment, it's economical to keep it super compact.
That makes sense. And I think a lot of bands are doing that these days. Is when they go on the road in a bigger show, they'll have a bigger lineup and maybe a recording. And it's pretty interesting to see how the industry is so different and has changed over the years. And a lot of clubs you play are maybe very nimble and for smaller events, and they want a smaller band up there. I think it's smart that you have the various lineups and as things need to be. And it's COVID. You brought up COVID, and it's the whole industry shuttered. Live music shuttered entirely for almost 2 years, unheard of in multiple lifetimes. I know in the classical industry, I didn't conduct a performance live. I did Zoom rehearsals all week, but I did no live performance for almost 2 years, and it was so devastating for the whole industry, pop industry, rock industry, you name it. What did you learn about yourself during that time?
I learned that too much time rattling around alone in my house and I can drive myself crazy. I also learned, a lot has happened in that time. We have this incredibly traumatic shared experience of this pandemic and, job insecurity and the world shifting before our eyes and scarcity of toilet paper, masks, food. Like, I'm sure you guys saw this in New York City, but in LA, like when the pandemic first hit, people went out and like went nuts. And when we came home from tour, it was like about 9 days in. And my biggest concern, my wife was actually on the East Coast dealing with medical stuff at the time. And my biggest concern was, what am I going to find to like put in the house to like cook and eat, because the stores were pretty grim. But I did really lean into the creative aspect during that time. And I think if I were to pick one thing that I think is the most profound thing that I learned, is that you can lean into something very difficult that's happening in the world or in your life and create something really beautiful. You can do that intentionally. And I think the experience that I just described with the other song, Escape, was kind of my brain doing that unintentionally. But over the course of the pandemic, I really started doing that with a specific intention to be like, okay, well, I'm feeling a certain way, and it perhaps is not the most pleasant feeling, and I know it's going to pass, but let's see what we can do with it.
What can be more magical than taking the challenges we face here and then putting it out there for the world in something that can move hearts? That's the magic of what music is, and its fundamental core, whether it's classical or contemporary, it doesn't really matter. I think it's that direct communication of emotions that make it so special.
I could not agree more. So speaking of hearts, one such song is our song Broken Hearts. And it's an interesting study on exactly what you just mentioned, because that song was written as, so my mother-in-law has since passed.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. With a disease as debilitating as cancer, sometimes the transition into whatever comes next is a merciful one. she fought as long as she could, and it was a very long struggle for her. So by the end, even though it was in the middle of a pandemic and that comes with its own complications, there was a healthy amount of relief for both myself and my wife. But Broken Hearts was written over the course of her journey, and specifically around the realization that we were going to have to let her go, and the complexity of that feeling of wanting more minutes with somebody and knowing that they themselves would be better off if those minutes didn't happen. So it's a very personal song. And interestingly enough, it got picked up for a placement on that show, Bull, on CBS. And it wasn't released at the time. It happened as kind of a surprise.
How do they find? I'm always amazed when that happens to bands. How did they find it?
So I was working with a publishing administrator for a couple of years, and she, the head of creative over there, had sent it, I don't know, like 9 months before they decided that they were going to try to place it. And so she just got an email in her inbox one day and circled back with me and shared the terms, the scene description, and whatnot. And it seemed compelling to me. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the show, but it's the main character, Bull. Dr. Bull is a psychiatrist, and runs a very innovative law practice. And he himself, I guess in this episode, he'd experienced a trauma that was very personal to him, is causing problems at work. And so this song was under kind of like the outro scene of the show, as he is trying to process that trauma by listening to a cell phone ring. The cell phone ring is what had been triggering to him. So not only did they put our song in a scene that was very, very, very fitting to the topic and the spirit with which it was written, but as an indie artist, you hope for a placement like that, and you especially hope that the watchers of that show will Shazam your song and thus discover you. But since the song wasn't released, there was no Shazam.
Oh.
So I was a little bit bummed about that. Like, I tried to schedule the release and just kind of crossed my fingers that Shazam would pull it in early. We had another song coming out the next week, so we couldn't release it instantly. It would collide with something that was already planned, right? So when I Shazammed it and my wife and I were watching the show, it was a little bit of a disappointment that the song didn't come up. I was like, oh, there goes the discovery.
I see you have 31,000 views on just on YouTube alone on Broken Hearts, so I think it's getting out there.
So that's the interesting part, is like, I was super disappointed about it, and then the next day somebody random commented on one of our posts, and they were just like, I just spent 2 hours trying to track you guys down, and I am so glad I did. Your song is amazing. When can I hear the whole thing?
That's great.
Every single day, I want to say, between then and the release, there was somebody else who had heard something in that song and spent a decent amount of their time online trying to find us. And that is like, that's powerful. Like, it was a little bit, it was a little bit of a humbling lesson, because I was a little bit upset about the whole Shazam thing, but then seeing this...
In a perfect world, perfect, it all lined up, but that's not the way the world ever works, especially when you're an indie artist and you're putting it yourself.
And what I realized is that if Shazam had worked, I never would have seen these people who are so dedicated to go and track us down on a Reddit thread or like TuneFind or whatever. I mean, I think the more people who found us, the easier it became, because then there's like breadcrumbs online. And but it was just a really gratifying thing. And yeah, so you're looking on the YouTube version of the video, but if you look on the Facebook version, what you'll notice is that the views are something, the engagements are something else. But if you look at the comments, and if you look at how many people have shared the video, like, people are sharing like personal stories, and it's a little overwhelming because a lot of them are very sad. But I do try to respond to as many as I can, only because, like, I think that when people share that personal of an aspect of themselves just openly online, it does deserve a response. So, and it's really just, you know, a little bit of a heartbreaking, but also a beautiful thing that, like, sadness can really bring us all together.
That cathartic experience that can be, a song can move us in ways that just spoken word just can't. It hits us in a different way. When you write these type of songs, do the lyrics come first, does the melody come first, or is there some hybrid of the two?
It's a little bit different every single time, actually. I think oftentimes the lyrics and melody kind of go hand in hand, only because the lyrics have to line up with the melodic cadence. But with this one, I want to say lyrics and melody were simultaneous. And what I really wanted to do was kind of like keep it very simple and approachable, but very emotive. So it was like kind of that balance between saying everything you want to say, but in as simple a way as possible and as few words as possible, and really just let the vocal do the emoting, if that makes sense.
You're such a deep thinker, and I think that's that comes across in every word and every emotion you say, and that makes sense. I love putting the musicians together with the music. To me, that's really an exciting thing, and it's been great to get to know your music, and I can't wait to see what the future is going to bring. What do you have coming up with the band?
So we are not currently playing live. We both miss playing live very, very much. But it's a complicated topic right now, and we are trying to exercise extreme caution, less for our own safety, but more for the safety of anyone who might walk into a room that we're playing in, when all the regulations are constantly changing and people kind of like don't know what's coming next. I think it's a good time to kind of just be patient. So what we are going to do is we are going to put together kind of a virtual release show of sorts, but a very well produced one that we will stream online, and then potentially supply for download after the fact. And so we're working on that right now. There is a lot of new music just kind of like floating around behind the scenes. So yeah, I mean, never a dull moment. And then eventually, and I hope this is sooner than later, once things become undeniably safe, I very much look forward to the opportunity to actually play live on stage. But I feel like we're a few confirmations away from taking that step, just from our personal perspectives.
Yeah, that makes sense. You don't want to wait till it's the right time, but it's given you a chance to really focus on the studio and the streaming and the pre-recording and all those things that we would never even thought about if we were out there touring steadily.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it will help to build resiliency if and when, I mean, I hope we don't, but if we ever experience something similar in our lifetimes, it'll help us prepare for whatever that is.
So where can people go to find out more about yourself and more about Ships of Sail? Where would you like them to go?
Shipsofsail.com is our website. It's a great place to start. You can get, the latest version of our bio, which will give you some background about the project. You can sign up for our mailing list, like our email list, which is actually probably the best way to stay in touch because there's no algorithms. Actually, there are algorithms in email inbox. They just aren't as shifty as the ones on social media feeds. You can also find all of our social media there, our Spotify, our Apple Music, our iTunes, and physical copies of our new album, which is available on CD and vinyl.
Support your indie artists. They're out there putting their heart and soul into their work, like Will and Ships Have Sailed, and there's no better way to show your support than buy albums.
This is 100% true.
Well, Will, thank you so much. I wish you and the band continued success, and I really enjoyed talking to you tonight. I can't wait to you take the stage again as it comes, and I'd like to be there.
Jason, thank you so much for making the time. Thank you for sharing your platform with me. This has been, honestly, a really amazing conversation.
Well, continued success.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Music Matters with Jason Tramm. Please remember to subscribe on YouTube and smash that bell icon. Also, check us out on our social media platforms on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all of those. Thank you so much. And remember, keep music alive.